They say you're kind, supportive, easy to work with, easy to be around, easy to like, and you've worn those words like a badge, not because they feel good, but because they feel necessary. You've built your entire identity around being the one who makes things easier for other people. You listen, you adjust, you accommodate, even when you're exhausted, even when it hurts, even when no one notices, especially when no one notices. You've trained yourself to read the room before you read yourself, to sense what people need before they even say it, and to give it without them having to ask. But here's what no one talks about. That kind of life, the life of constant pleasing, constant softening, constant shrinking, it comes with a cost. A cost most people will never see, because you hide it too well. The tension in your jaw after you fake another smile. The weight in your chest after you say, "It's fine," for the 10th time today. The way your voice gets quieter each year, even though you're screaming inside. You've been conditioned to think this is what being a good person looks like. But let's be honest, it doesn't feel good. It feels like disappearing in slow motion. And here's the worst part. Most people will never ask you to stop, because they benefit from your silence. They like the version of you that never pushes back, the one who never makes them uncomfortable. So, no, they won't stop you from slowly breaking yourself down to make them more comfortable. They'll thank you for it, and you'll smile, and something inside you will rot a little more. Now ask yourself, when did being nice start to feel like being nothing? When did giving become a disguise for fear? When did helping everyone else become the excuse to abandon yourself? You didn't choose this consciously. This was survival. You learned it young, maybe even before you had words for it. Be easy, be good, be liked, be useful, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be safe. But that kind of safety is a lie, and deep down you know it. You're not tired from working too much. You're tired from pretending too long. And here's the part no one tells you. You can't keep sacrificing yourself and expect to feel whole. You can't keep saying yes to everything and expect to still recognize who's saying it. What if the version of you everyone loves is just the version you created to survive? Because if that's true, then the real you, the one you buried, the one you've been afraid to become, that's the only version that's ever going to feel free. You didn't become a people pleaser because you're weak. You became one because it worked. Early on, you learned something most people never say out loud. Being agreeable gets you love. Being quiet keeps you safe. Being good earns you just enough acceptance to survive. It probably started in childhood. Maybe you had a parent who exploded when things weren't perfect, or a caregiver who only paid attention when you were helpful. Or maybe nothing dramatic happened, just a constant, quiet pressure to make yourself small so others could stay comfortable. So you adapted. You noticed that speaking up caused tension, that showing emotion made people pull away, that saying no made you feel guilty, like you were doing something wrong just by existing on your own terms. So you made a decision without even realizing it. It's better to be good than to be real. It's better to be liked than to be honest. It's better to be needed than to be whole. And for a long time it worked. You were the dependable one, the calm one, the one who always showed up, always said yes, always made things easier. But here's the trap. When you build your worth around being good, you stop being human. You turn yourself into a function, a role, a utility for other people's comfort. And somewhere along the way, you lose track of the most important question of all. Who are you when no one needs you? Carl Jung had a word for the version of you that shows up just to keep things smooth. The persona. It's not fake. It's functional. It's the part of you that plays the role society rewards, the mask you wear to get through the day. But when that mask becomes your identity, when your whole life revolves around staying liked, staying agreeable, staying nice, you don't just wear the persona, you become trapped inside it. And the more you succeed at being good, the more you disappear. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Being liked is not the same thing as being loved. Being needed is not the same thing as being seen. And being good doesn't mean you're free. In fact, the opposite is usually true. People pleasers don't feel light, they feel heavy. Not because of what they're doing for others, but because of what they're constantly denying in themselves. Every moment spent keeping the peace is a moment spent silencing your own storm. And after years of swallowing your truth, your needs, your anger, you don't just feel disconnected from others. You feel disconnected from yourself. That's the real cost of being good. It's not the time, it's not the energy, it's the quiet death of your identity. And if you've been living like that long enough, you don't even notice the death anymore. You just call it being tired. But let's be clear, you're not tired from life. You're tired from hiding. And that exhaustion? That's your soul begging you to stop pretending. Because you can only wear the mask for so long before something underneath starts to crack. You tell yourself you're just being thoughtful, that you're keeping the peace, that it's not a big deal to let things slide. But here's the truth, no one tells you. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you downplay what you feel just to keep someone else comfortable, you're not being kind. You're abandoning yourself, and it adds up. You don't notice it at first. It looks like stress, irritability, feeling off but not knowing why. But that's not just a mood. That's your shadow trying to surface. Jung described the shadow as every part of yourself you've disowned to survive. The anger you buried. The boundaries you never enforced. The truth you swallowed because someone else's comfort mattered more than your own. These aren't flaws. They're not bad emotions. They're parts of you that never got permission to exist. And the longer you deny them, the louder they get. Not through words, but through symptoms. Anxiety, numbness, shame. A kind of grief you can't even explain. Because how do you grieve something you never let live in the first place? You tell yourself you're just keeping things light. But lightness without honesty isn't peace, it's repression. You're not avoiding conflict with others, you're avoiding conflict with yourself. Here's what makes this worse. People praise you for it. They thank you for your patience, your selflessness, your ability to let things go. And each time they do, it reinforces the lie that the real you, the one with needs, emotions, opinions, doesn't deserve to be seen. So you keep the shadow buried. You perform harmony while your insides rot. You become so good at disappearing that people stop looking for you altogether. And that's when the real pain begins. Not just because you feel empty, but because you start to believe that the emptiness is who you are. But it's not. That emptiness is a space filled with everything you refuse to express, everything you sacrificed in the name of being good. The worst part? You start to resent yourself for having those feelings at all. You think, why can't I just be okay with this? Why am I so sensitive? Why do I always feel like I'm holding something in? And here's the answer. Because you are. You're holding in the parts of you that were never allowed to breathe. You're carrying years of swallowed words, forced smiles, and fake apologies. You've mistaken being nice for being safe. But repression isn't safety, it's slow suffocation. And if you never let those parts out, they'll find their own way. Through breakdowns, explosions, withdrawal, or worse, through a life that feels like nothing at all. You don't get to avoid your shadow. You either confront it, or it runs the show from the dark. So if you feel like you're not in control of your life anymore, it's probably because the parts you buried are now the ones driving, and they're not asking for permission. They're demanding to be felt. And when you ignore them long enough, that buried self doesn't stay quiet. It turns into something else. Resentment, bitterness, rage. You've spent years being agreeable, making things easy, keeping the peace. But deep down, let's be honest, you're pissed. You're tired of pretending. You're tired of swallowing your reactions while everyone else gets to be loud, selfish, demanding, real. And yet you keep doing it, smiling, nodding, accommodating, like you're afraid that one moment of honesty might destroy everything you've built. But it's already falling apart, because here's what people don't understand about people pleasers. They don't stay soft forever. There's a limit, and when you cross it, what's left isn't kindness. It's quiet, corrosive resentment. You don't yell, you shut down. You don't fight, you withdraw. You don't explode, you rot from the inside out. You say yes while thinking, why do I always have to be the one? You show up while silently wishing someone would notice how much it costs you. And when they don't, that bitterness builds. It builds when someone takes you for granted, when they assume you're fine, when they lean on your silence like it's endless. And it builds even more when you realize they didn't make you do this. You did. That's the worst part. The realization that no one forced you to betray yourself. You did it willingly, repeatedly, because somewhere along the way you convinced yourself that your value came from being useful, not from being whole. And now you're angry, but not just at them. You're angry at yourself. For every time you let something slide, for every truth you choked on, for every time you pretended it didn't hurt, just so they'd stay comfortable. That anger, it's not evil, it's not a flaw, it's a message. It's your real self knocking from the inside saying, enough. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And this rage you feel, it's not just about them. It's about the part of you that's done being erased. But here's the danger. When you ignore this rage long enough, it stops being energy. It becomes poison. It leaks into your relationships. It distorts your empathy. It kills your joy. You start second-guessing people's intentions. You assume they'll take advantage of you because you've let them before. You start punishing others for the boundaries you never set. And eventually, you pull away from the very connections you once craved because you're too full of resentment to keep pretending. That's how people-pleasing turns into self-isolation. That's how the nicest person in the room becomes the most emotionally distant. You don't trust yourself to speak, because you know once the truth comes out, it won't be pretty. So you stay silent. But now it's not peace you're protecting. It's the fear of what happens when you finally stop hiding. And make no mistake, if you don't find a way to release that anger with clarity, it will come out with violence. Not always physical, but emotional, spiritual, internal. So the question becomes, do you keep pretending you're okay, or do you face the truth that you're not, and start choosing differently? Because this rage isn't going away, it's waiting. And every time you smile through your own silence, it smiles back. And eventually, that silence becomes your whole life. At some point, you stop pretending for others and start pretending for yourself. You tell yourself you're just in a slump, just tired, just overwhelmed. But deep down, you know it's something else. You don't feel burned out because of what you're doing. You feel burned out because of who you're doing it as. You've been performing for so long that you don't even know what real feels like anymore. You shapeshift to fit every room, every role, every relationship. And somewhere in the process, you've lost the thread. You can't name what you want. You can't hear your own voice over the noise of what everyone else needs. You've worn the good person mask for so long that it's fused with your skin. And now you're just empty. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, terrifying way. The kind of empty that smiles onto you, that answers "I'm fine" automatically, that wakes up every day wondering what version of yourself you need to be to get through it. This is what Jung meant when he talked about a psychic split. A fracture between the self you show the world and the one screaming underneath. On the outside, you're composed, reliable, holding it all together. On the inside, you're unraveling. You catch yourself zoning out in conversations, feeling numb during moments that should move you, You can't tell if you're anxious or depressed or just gone. This isn't just emotional fatigue. This is soul fatigue. Because you've been living against yourself for too long. Every yes that meant no. Every smile that hid resentment. Every apology you didn't owe. They didn't just drain you. They disconnected you from your own instincts, your own boundaries, your own truth. Now even small decisions feel paralyzing. Where to eat, what you like, who you trust. You've outsourced so much of your identity to pleasing others, there's nothing left to anchor you. And when you finally get alone, it's not peace you feel, it's panic. Because without someone else to orbit around, you don't know how to exist. That's the collapse. It doesn't look like screaming, it looks like silence. It looks like you going through the motions, working, helping, smiling, while something inside quietly decays. And people don't notice. Why would they? You've trained them not to. You made sure they'd never see you struggle. And now, even if they looked, you're not sure you'd let them in. But here's the hardest part. You don't trust yourself to come back from this. Because you don't even remember who you were before the pleasing began. But let me be clear, that version of you, the one who felt things, who had edges, who could take up space, they're not gone, they're just buried. Beneath the habits, the guilt, the fake calm, they're still there. And maybe this collapse, this numbness, this fatigue, this loss, isn't the end. Maybe it's the signal that the life you built by silencing yourself has finally reached its limit. And if something in you is breaking right now, it's only because it's tired of bending. But breaking isn't the end. Sometimes it's the only way something real can begin. The hardest part about breaking free isn't the pain. You've lived with pain. You've carried it like second skin. What's harder is facing the fear of who you'll become when you stop betraying yourself. Because let's be honest, you've been told your whole life that choosing yourself is selfish. That saying no means you don't care. That having boundaries means you're difficult, cold, ungrateful. So now, even the smallest act of self-respect feels like rebellion. You start to say no and immediately want to explain yourself. You take space and feel guilty for not being available. You speak your truth and brace for backlash that may never come. It's not easy, because when your identity has been built around being good, kind, selfless, choosing yourself feels like becoming the villain. But you're not. You're not cruel. You're not abandoning people. You're just finally refusing to abandon yourself. And yes, some people won't like it. The ones who were only comfortable with you when you had no boundaries. They'll call your growth selfish. They'll call your voice rude. They'll call your wholeness too much. Let them. Their discomfort isn't your burden anymore. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming whole. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. A person who doesn't split themselves into parts just to survive. You stop giving out of obligation. You start giving out of alignment. You stop tolerating things that drain you. You start choosing what actually reflects who you are. But here's the truth. It's messy. Sometimes you overcorrect. You say no too hard. You pull back too far. You confuse anger for clarity. That's okay. Learning to choose yourself after years of erasing yourself is disorienting. You're not just building new habits. You're unlearning survival patterns. And survival patterns don't die quietly. They'll whisper things like, "You're being dramatic. You're too sensitive. You're gonna lose everyone if you keep acting like this." But those aren't truths. They're echoes. Old voices from a time when being real wasn't safe. You don't have to listen to them anymore. You're allowed to be whole without being perfect. You're allowed to take up space without apologizing. You're allowed to disappoint others if it means being honest with yourself. Because if your peace depends on your silence, if your relationships require your constant self-sacrifice, if your kindness is rooted in fear, that's not love. That's a transaction. And your soul was never meant to be currency. The most radical thing you can do is stop performing and start living. Not aggressively, Not in protest, just honestly. You'll lose some people, but you'll also lose the anxiety of constantly managing their perception of you. And what you gain? You gain a voice, a spine, a clarity you've never known. You learn that saying no doesn't make you cruel. It makes you clear. That honoring yourself doesn't make you hard to love. It makes you finally available for the kind of love that sees the real you. And once you taste that, you'll never trade your authenticity for approval again, because something shifts. Not all at once, not loudly, but it's real. There's a moment after the collapse, after the anger, after the guilt, where something strange happens. You don't feel broken anymore. You feel empty, but in a clean way, like something false has finally been scraped off. And for the first time in a long time, there's space. You stop obsessing over how others see you. You stop needing to be liked in every room you walk into. You stop filtering every word through the question, will this make them uncomfortable? And what fills that space? Not ego, not aggression, not some fake idea of power. What fills that space is clarity. You start hearing your own voice again. Not the voice that explains, apologizes, softens, pleads. The voice underneath that, the one that just knows. You're not louder, you're not meaner, you're not harder to deal with. You're just real now. And that changes everything. Because when you stop performing, you stop attracting people who only love the performance. Some fall away. Let them. They weren't in love with you. They were in love with what you did for them. But the ones who stay, the ones who come closer, they're seeing you for the first time, and they're staying anyway. That's how you know it's real. You realize you don't have to explain every decision. You don't have to justify your boundaries. You don't owe anyone a performance just to earn their presence. You stop waiting for permission to exist. And suddenly, all those parts of you used to hide, the anger, the needs, the opinions, the emotions, they stop feeling dangerous. They start feeling human. You realize being kind doesn't mean being silent. Being compassionate doesn't mean being available 24/7. Being good doesn't mean being small. The truth is, you were never too much. You were just too real for people who wanted you controlled. Now, you're no longer the person who flattens themselves to be palatable. You're no longer the emotional sponge, the fixer, the peacemaker, the sacrificial lamb. You're whole, not perfect, not polished. There are still moments of doubt, moments when the old guilt creeps in, moments when someone gives you that look, the one that used to make you fold. But now you recognize it. Now you pause. Now you choose instead of react. That's power, not dominance, not control, just the power of no longer betraying yourself. You wake up and you don't brace for the day. You enter it. You walk into conversations and you don't rehearse in your head. You speak. You're not trying to be good. You're just being true. And after a lifetime of shape-shifting, there's nothing more liberating than simply being who you are. Without permission, without apology, without fear. And once you feel that kind of freedom, real, grounded, not for sale freedom, there's no going back. You can't unsee it. You can't unknow what it feels like to be in your own skin without flinching. To speak and not brace. To say no and not explain. To love without disappearing. You realize how much of your life was spent surviving, not living. How often you confused being agreeable with being safe. How deeply you feared that your real self might push people away. But the truth is, the people who left, they were never with you in the first place. They were with the version of you that flattered their comfort. Let them go. You don't need a crowd. You need alignment. Because peace doesn't come from being liked, it comes from being known. Fully. Honestly. Without edits. And that kind of peace only shows up when you stop negotiating your worth. When you stop asking the world for permission to exist. So if you felt that tension, if your smile has been hiding a scream, if your silence has started to feel like a lie, if your body is tired of bending, that's not weakness. That's a signal. A signal that you've outgrown your survival script. That pleasing everyone is no longer a goal. That disappearing isn't an option anymore. And maybe for the first time, you're not trying to be perfect, or palatable, or polite. You're just trying to be true. That's where everything begins. So if this landed, if it stirred something in you, don't ignore it. That's the part of you that's still alive. Still fighting. Still yours. Let it grow. Let it speak. Let it take the space it was always meant to take. And if you want help putting words to that process, if you want more content that doesn't coddle you, but actually calls you back to yourself, subscribe. Not because I said so. Because something in you finally said, I'm done pretending. You're not here to please. You're here to live. Fully. Finally. For real.